Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is part 2 of introducing the clear Quran. I'm going to be reading the Quran and putting it in a series, but to begin with we're just doing an introductory, so this is part 2. So if you need part 1, please go to my page, find part 1 and have a look at that first. So let's get on. I'm up to what is the Quran? What is the Quran? The Quran is a holy book of Islam. It's a collection of revelations that were received by the Prophet Muhammad over a course of 23 years in the 7th century CE. There is only one version of the Quran, perfectly preserved in written and oral records around the world for nearly 1400 years. The Quran is the only book in history that has been memorized verbatim by millions of people. Chapters were written down separately during the lifetime of the Prophet and were collected in one volume within 2 years of his death. Exact copies were later duplicated from the original collection during the reign of the third Caliph, sent to their major Muslim cities. Today, all copies of the Quran are perfect duplicates of the original. Nothing's changed. Was the Quran copied from the Bible? It is worth mentioning that the first Arabic translation of the Bible was done centuries after the Prophet's death. From an Islamic point of view, similarities between the Quran and the Bible, especially historic stories such as Joseph, Moses and Jesus, stem from the fact that both scriptures come originally from the same source, divine revelation. Because of the differences in transmission and interpretation of the Bible, over time the stories changed. The Quranic narratives now appear slightly different. For example, unlike the Quran in Surah 20, 120 to 122, in the book of Genesis, Eve was tempted to eat fruit from the tree and therefore she is to blame for the fall. Also, according to the Quran chapter 19, prophets are infallible of sin. But in the Bible, some prophets are guilty of shameful and even criminal acts. For example, David impregnated his neighbour's wife before conspiring to get her husband killed. And that's in 2 Samuel 11, 1 to 27. Lot had sex with his 2 daughters, Genesis 19, 30 to 38. And Noah got drunk and naked, Genesis 9, 20 to 21. Some biblical stories are not in the Quran and vice versa. For example, the biblical story of Isaac is not in the Quran, while the story of Moses and Al-Qadir are mentioned in chapter 18 of the Quran and not in the Bible. Also, there are 3 miracles of Jesus in the Quran that are not in the Bible. See Surah 5, 110 to 115. Although both scriptures emphasize global ethics, such as dignity, kindness and charity, each revolves around a different theology. Both have contrasting views on the perception of God, Jesus' salvation, crucifixion, and the original sin. Is Islam compatible with science? Although the Quran is a book of signs, but not of science, there are many scientific references in the Quran, such as the formation and development phases of the embryo in the uterus. Find this in Surah 23, verses 12 to 14, and also Surah 25, 5. The Big Bang, Surah 21:30, and the constant expansion of the universe, Surah 51, 47 to 48. Spherical shape of the earth, Surah 39, 5, and also 79, 30. The Earth's rotation, Surah 27, 88, and many others have been known only in the last 2 centuries. According to an Arab proverb, the ink of a scholar is holier than the blood of a martyr. Islam's emphasis on education galvanized learning and sciences in the Muslim world, culminating in what is known as the Islamic Golden Age. For centuries, Muslims pioneered medicine, anatomy, mathematics, geography, astronomy, architecture, and many other sciences. Muslims invented numerous sciences and developed many others, which they inherited from the Romans, Greeks, Persians, Indians, and others, and laid the foundations to the European Industrial Revolution. The invention of cameras, computers, and navigation systems could not have been possible without the contributions of Muslim scholars. What is Sharia law? Linguistically, Sharia means a pathway. Technically, it's a Muslim law, derived mainly from the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, governing every aspect of a Muslim's life. Sharia is made up of thousands of teachings and rulings covering theology, acts of worship, manners, human interactions, business transactions, family relations, marriage, divorce, inheritance, war and peace, belief in the unseen, God, angels, and hereafter, and criminal law. Sharia mainly aims at protecting 5 things: life, honour, freedom to practice one's faith, intellect, and property. Therefore, the punishments in Islamic law for violating any of these rights. Every country has its punishments for offences, even though the penalty for the same crime may vary from one country to another. To say that Sharia is about chopping people's hands off is like saying America's law is all about killing people with the electric chair. Sharia does not apply to non-Muslims, minorities living predominantly in Muslim countries. Of the 57 Muslim countries in the world, the greater majority are secular, not Sharia-based. Muslims lived in the West follow the law of the land and maintain Sharia mainly in personal matters such as prayers, marriage, and inheritance. So Sharia also forbids the consumption of pork, alcohol, and drugs. Smoking is also frowned upon.